Welcome to Connecting the Dots, the podcast where we share our stories from the battlefield of consulting. I'm Johnny Hill, your host, and today I'm joined by several of my friends at Expiro.
Hey, I'm Kareem Jamal.
I am Phil Gambling.
Hi, I'm Ted Wilmus.
Hey, I'm Bruno Beriso.
So we're all together today to talk about the sunk cost fallacy, what it is, why it matters, and how to know when you've bought into it. So let's jump in. So starting off, we should probably define what the sunk cost fallacy actually is, like from a psychological perspective. My understanding is it's essentially when like a person or like a group of people, a company, a department, don't want to change or abandon a certain strategy or solution because they've quote unquote sunk too much time into it, time, effort, money, things like that. And they're reluctant to change it, even if it's obvious that their current strategy or approach isn't working. So that's what it looks like from a psychological perspective, but how have we seen this show up in the software and consulting world?
Sure. So even before we get into the software world, it's just good to realize how you see it in your day-to-day life, right? A common example of this is watching movies. So you're halfway into a movie, it sucks. You realize that it sucks. You don't really want to keep watching it because it hasn't, piqued your interest. There's no climax or twists or anything. You think it's just gonna suck for the next hour as well. Yet you've already watched half of it, so why not just see it through and watch the rest of it? That's an example where you sunk some time into it, so now you just want to go through with it, even though it may not turn out well. So how does this, happen in the software world? Well, it happens in small and big pieces. A big example is your technology choice, right? So say you've chosen a front-end framework like Angular or something, and a good amount and investment through it, you realize, hey, this is not the best framework we should have used. Maybe we should backtrack, or do we continue sinking time into this and just see it through to make it work? That's a technology example in software.
Yeah, you also see that like from the design perspective, you may have a client, or we've worked with clients before who have said, yeah, we spent all this time, all this money with a big rebrand, and we didn't do the research ahead of time, like the user testing, to see if it was actually going to help improve clarity, improve usability. And now that we've spent, a huge sum of money and a bunch of time, and we've spent all of this effort with this big redesign, now it's worse. Is it really worth going back and changing it again? So that's partially a case for user testing, trying to get ahead of that before you make the big change, deciding to put in the time to validate, to make sure it's a good idea, make sure it actually will improve things. But it's also on the flip side, if you've already done that once, you can be more hesitant to try to do it again or to try to salvage because you've already spent so much effort on it, it didn't work.
And it applies to organizations, and it applies down to the individual. As a developer, I have this thought about going down implementation rabbit holes where you're working on a feature, you're trying to fix that bug, you've spent days at it, you've written all this code, and it's just not coming together. But you don't want to throw away that code because you're kind of attached to it. You've I've spent so much effort into this. When really, the way you took the wrong path. You need to throw it away and start over. So kind of like to the individual and then to the organization also, not just technology choices, but sometimes the buy versus build decision. There's the not built here syndrome where, a development organization goes off and builds this custom solution that they could have just bought off the shelf or bought as a service and spent way less time. But now they're married to that, their custom solution that they built in-house, even if it's not nearly as good as something they could be paying for.
And it's one of those things that you just oftentimes just find out as you go. You couldn't really know as you're going into it. But as you continuously struggle and see that friction, you stop and think, hey, should I continue down this path or not?
Yeah, and I think this can be pretty tricky because sometimes, because this has to do with, people sinking large amounts of effort into something already. There's emotional attachment. I'm as guilty of this as anyone else for sure. And so there's the emotional attachment, but then there's also all of the things that actually went into this maybe original decision that may not be readily apparent. And so sometimes with the sunk cost fallacy, the identification of it can actually be a little bit difficult. Like there could be, parties with different viewpoints on this. Some thinking that moving in a different direction is worthwhile, and some others thinking, well, there were reasons we did this thing, and don't underestimate, the implications of going in a different direction. So this can be particularly tricky, I think, from a technical standpoint, but then also just kind of an organizational and interrelationship standpoint of the teams that are identifying these sorts of things.
Yeah, for me, this is particularly hard to identify because I tend to get attached to the things that I build. So I need to constantly be paying attention to what I'm doing and make sure that I'm not detecting this kind of fallacies on my decision-making process. I think that I need to be comparing the costs of what I'm going to do next all the time to make sure that I'm not considering the effort that I already put on building what I have right now. For me, it's pretty hard to identify when I'm incurring this particular fallacy.
Yeah, it's something that it's difficult to see in yourself. It's probably easier to see from the outside looking in. So, I mean, I feel like a big part of this, but maybe that's a good question. Like, how do you know when you've bought into this, or you're just, you just need more time, or you need more resources to make an improvement, to make things change? Like, how can you tell, oh no, we really have just bought into something that's a lost cause and we just need to throw in the towel?
Sometimes it's just taking a step back and breathing for a moment, right? As each of us, whether they be devs or UX, just really put our heads down and get into it. It's hard to see the bigger picture, and we just keep working at it and working at it. But sometimes every now and then, just take your head up and see, hey, how much productivity am I getting from the work I'm doing? Am I really running into a lot of trouble or friction trying to get this through? Right? I'm working with the designer, but the tools we're using don't seem to be the best offering available right now. I have to go in and manually look up stuff instead of the tool automatically generating it. So sometimes it's just, stop and look up or talk to people around you that can be better at noticing when you're sort of in this trap.
Yeah, I think like team velocity decreasing, features not being delivered on time, especially when they're like common problems, like usually associated with that same thing, maybe that same tech, that same system, like we're always having problems with that guy, that thing over there. Maybe that's a sign that, yeah, there's a problem that you need to revisit that completely.
And sometimes it's just a way to go about it is time boxing. You're looking, working with the technology or whatever it may be, with specific key questions that you want answers to. And coming out of that, you can then take the next steps and figure out the direction you want to go.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at this, you kind of need to think about it's, what's in front of me right now that's maybe being affected by this, but then also, working with product, like what's the roadmap? So how does, if we were to make a change or stay with what we're currently doing, like maybe something is a little bit of painful right now, but if we look at the roadmap, maybe it turns out, it doesn't look like we're going to get a big enough win to make it worthwhile. Or maybe it's the opposite. Like if we go in a new direction, this kind of unlocks roadmap opportunities that just aren't feasible on the current system.
Okay, yeah. So that helps understanding at least a little bit about how to identify when you actually are buying into this fallacy that you've sunk so much cost in that there's no other solution, just keep going. But I guess the big follow-up question from that is, What's the big deal? Does it really matter? Like, what's the real danger of buying into this sunk cost fallacy?
Yeah, I think from maybe not from the developer perspective, but more from, say, the customers that you're serving perspective, is just, what is the rate that I'm getting, new features at? What is the stability of those features? What's the stability of existing features? If the underlying technology is perhaps could use some sort of update in a particular area and that's not happening, it's going to manifest itself probably directly to the customer, or maybe if not directly to the customer, it's still going to be very painful for the folks who are actually maintaining to continue down that route.
Another one from a team's perspective is if you're constantly behind on delivering features, constantly having problems with that troublesome system, that's going to really hurt team morale. It's going to hurt productivity. Besides unhappy customers, unhappy developers, unhappy designers. And so, when everything else might be humming along, but this one thing is just dragging everything down, and that kind of almost infection spread. So you want to tackle things that can affect the team morale and productivity sooner than later.
Right. You might have a decent product now, but if everyone working on it's miserable, it probably won't be decent for much longer, especially if morale is low and you're losing people because you got turnover.
And any one of these things will start feeding into the others, and then you head into a downward spiral. And so you really want to be, cognizant of how your choices and your direction is really affecting any one of these key factors.
And also, I was going to say, you're going to take decisions based on the wrong inputs, right? You're considering something that is not really valuable anymore. So if for every decision that you're making, you are taking into account what effort you put already on building what you have, you're taking as an input the wrong measurement, basically, and that measurement is going to grow over time. So when the time goes by, you are just thinking about the wrong metrics to decide how to do next, or what decision to do next, what technology to do next, or what approach to take. So I think the danger is all the things that we already mentioned. I think that there are direct consequences of considering the wrong input on what to do next.
Yeah, and I mean the big obvious one is it's expensive. If you're constantly going over budget and wasting money and losing talent, like that's really costly for a project, and that really affects the bottom line and everyone involved. So obviously, if you're using the wrong technology or you've sunk a bunch of money into the wrong technology, even though, in your head, oh, well, we'd be spending so much money to change it. If you're bleeding money because of, it's not the right tool for the job, it's going to be a painful initial step, but ultimately it's going to help the financial stability of the project as well. But I mean, there's other things we need to consider too, like other factors when you decide to make this decision other than that initial financial investment. So, I mean, what are some of the things that you need to take into consideration if you're actually going to do this and say, this isn't working, we got to do something else?
Yeah. So if you're saying, okay, guys, we're going to make this change. We're going to go away from this decision that hasn't worked out. I think you have to manage how you communicate that. Because people, like we've said earlier, are can be emotionally attached to these decisions, to the things they built. And people don't like change. No one likes throwing away code. So that might really come off like a personal attack. To use the Angular example, like we're going to React, we're getting rid of Angular, but someone may identify themselves as the Angular expert, and suddenly it's like, oh, we're throwing me away too. So you really want to have kind of strong leadership and communicate why you're doing this and manage people's feelings as best you can. It may not be possible to get everyone on board, but know it's not going to necessarily be something everyone's happy about.
You also have to create this environment of psychological safety, right? Because if you're actually saying, hey, we made the wrong decision, let's not sink any more time and effort into this, let's figure out a new solution. It's almost thought of as, hey, this first, or this current go at it has been a failure, and that was something that forces people to continue grinding through it, right? Because they don't want that failure on them. And so creating that environment where, hey, we're experimenting, we're trying to figure out the best possible path forward. It's okay to backtrack and figure out a better way forward. Needs to be accepted within the team and within the organization. Otherwise, there will always be resistance to just putting that sunk cost aside and starting fresh. Because it will come with a higher cost for a time as you try to repeat the stuff and do it in the new tech.
Yeah, and you want to basically, you could frame it as, hey, we sure, okay, that was a great decision, but we're not pointing fingers at anyone. Or really frame it like, hey, we sure learned a lot from that experience. Now let's apply that to this new direction. So, try to put a silver lining on it.
Yeah, because many times, everything has kind of a life cycle. So maybe this thing actually served its purpose very well for a long time, and then slowly kind of hit the other side of the hill and started going down the slope. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't beneficial for a period of time. So within in single project, or the life cycle of a company, it's just be a series of these kind of life cycle transitions. And so it can be difficult, but if you can kind of identify the right times to do those and get people on board, it can smooth things out.
Yeah, I think just kind of capping that off, like you were saying at the beginning, Phil and Kareem, like a lot of it comes down to just clear communication from the leadership, from whoever is making the decision at the end of the day. Hey, we're going to go in this direction. Being humble enough to be able to say, hey, yeah, we got it wrong before, and showing their work and saying, here's the research we did, here's how we came to this new conclusion, inviting comments and feedback on that decision, instead of just saying, no, I'm unilaterally deciding we're going to do this now instead. Like having clear and open communication, clear and open expectations goes a really long way toward keeping people unified when you make this big kind of change. But I guess kind of pushing off from that, like if you're maybe in a project that like you think maybe this is going on, but you're not really sure, you don't know if it's something you should bring up as a possibility. Maybe what are some of the warning signs you need to be keeping an eye out for? What are some of the things that show this might be happening?
I think maybe a warning sign early on in the decision making is, when your team's evaluating different options, is there a clear bias that everyone's already subscribed to? So they're trying to find, they're trying to find a solution that, or rather find a problem for the solution they know. So to beat on Angular again, like everyone's an Angular dev, and it's maybe not the best choice here, but everyone just wants to find an excuse for that. And then you can see that with Ted. I mean, you've been in a lot of situations where everyone's convinced they have a graph problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been convinced I've had a graph problem before myself, and so one of the things I've noticed just personally is it's especially in maybe on like a smaller team, or if in an instance where maybe I've gotten really deep into something, or a few people have gotten really deep into something, like say, hey, check out this cool graph technology. And it's difficult for anybody else to kind of use or get up to speed on it, and that can really hurt velocity. So I think if you see where there's these scenarios where maybe there's only like a few experts who are ended up working in some core area of your project or something, that could be a sign that due to like no fault of the rest of the team, but because of that particular technology, like it's just more difficult to use than one would want. So kind of keep your eyes out for something that isn't kind of, I guess, easily transferable to the rest of the team.
Yeah, that's a good way to note that you're falling victim to this is if you have the luxury of having more than one person or a dev or UX working on the project, if multiple people are experiencing that same type of friction, that's a good warning sign that, hey, something's not right. And even in the cases where you only have one person working on it, if the project manager is routinely talking to the person, and communicating and keeping that open channel, they may sense some growing, frustration from the person. And then they can, start querying more about it and digging into it to figure out, is it the person just being unhappy with something, or is it more the decision, the choice that was made that's really causing the frustration and the slowdown?
Yeah, another sign could be growing technical depth. If you see that for every new feature that you are putting in on the product, you have like losing code coverage, for example, on the tests, or introducing too many bugs, that could be another sign that you're picking the wrong tool for the job.
Okay, so yeah, there are obviously signs, but I think one important thing to note is there's no silver bullet. Like there's not the one thing that oh, this means we need to change direction. Like you need to put the work in, you need to have the conversations, you need to do research, you need to ask other people and kind of gather your evidence before you decide, because this is a big decision to make. If you've been using Angular for 12 years, now you need to switch to something else completely. That's a big decision. It's not something that should be made lightly. But I guess
there's quite an extensive kind of cost benefit analysis. And on our previous episode, we talked about, how do you go about even deciding whether or not to use new technology or something. And so that maybe if we flip the order here, it'd be like, okay, well, we identify a potential, sunk cost fallacy situation, but then it's like, okay, well, cool, we identified it, but like, what's next? That's just kind of like the start of your journey there. You need to validate whether or not that's really the case, and then you need to be like, okay, well, what are the actual ramifications of addressing this?
Right.
Going back to our movie analogy, it's, hey, I've sat through this, but do I find myself pulling out my phone now and paying more attention to that, or looking around, or going to go get some popcorn, the extremely expensive popcorn at theaters, extra butter, please, or just going randomly and sitting in another movie, right? It's those are all signs, that something's just not right with the current direction that we're going.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say you've identified that, yeah, this is a real thing. We need to assess and move forward. Like, where do you start? What do you do? Like, what are your options when you realize that you've bought into this sunk cost fallacy?
You go out to the back and beat up your printer and desktop with a bat.
Yeah. Well, that happens. Yeah, there's both the printer and they end by lighting the building on fire, right?
That's right.
Wait, no, it doesn't. No, what's his face? The guy with the stapler.
The stapler guy does
Stapler
that.
guy.
He ends up lighting on fire. Yeah.
I mean, one of the first things, whoever notices this is, talk to the managers, talk to the team, see if this is an issue, see what options we have to move forward. Sometimes you're just restricted by the pieces in place, right? So the budget, the time, you can't really do anything about it. But other times, there's definitely some wiggle room, some flexibility to step back and make a different choice.
I think one of the things, this is more of like, what could you do maybe, as a developer, you kind of would hope that you'd always have some slice of your time where you were just able to concentrate on things like refactoring, making things that are existing better. I guess it's pretty unrealistic to expect to get that chunk of time in a lot of cases. But one option I feel like is, realize that of course we're not always going to make perfect decisions, or something's going to go stale, but try to like cut down that, discovery time of that particular instance, so that you're not finding out and in dealing with this, big bang thing, and instead you're kind of, catching it up front. But that can really be difficult just because it involves this becoming part of your processes at kind of every level.
Also, another thing that I think is useful to do when you have these situations is, okay, when you detect that you didn't make the right choice, just try to split or separate what you learn about the problem that is not related to the technology. So you got, for example, if you pick the wrong tool for the job, you learn a lot about the problem either way. So just try to get the maximum amount of information about what you already have without throwing everything away.
And external opinions always help, right? Whether it's external or not, right? Just having someone outside, not necessarily even the company, but outside the team, outside of your direct project. If you can consult with them and get, second, third opinions, that will help as well.
That can even be kind of an approach up front to help guard yourself against those biases, is also pulling outside expertise to help evaluate those things, because the outsider isn't going to be as married to whatever ideas your team might already have.
Okay, yeah. So let's say you recognize this is the situation you're in. You have some ideas about maybe how to move forward, some solutions for it. But what if you're in a position where you don't have the authority or the voice to really make any changes, where you feel like you can't come to management, you can't bring these ideas to someone who maybe would have that authority? Like, what do you do in that situation?
So one approach is put together a small example. If this is maybe like we're trying to evaluate technology choices, put together a small example to help communicate what's going on to leadership, so distill the problem down. And then I think there's another factor of, it depends where you are on the pecking order, right? You may be too low of a man on the totem pole for anyone to listen to your opinion, even if it's a valid opinion. So maybe there's someone else higher up, maybe not necessarily in the same organization, but someone that you have the ear of, that can kind of help communicate or intercede on your behalf.
Sometimes you just have to realize that, hey, this is what it is, and you just have to make the best of the situation you're in, right? There may not be that flexibility to change now, but at least you can learn from the current situation to be able to apply it to the next one.
Also, I think that you can be positive about the problems, right? Even when you're down on the field and dealing with the problem, with the real consequence of picking the wrong tool, you can be positive. You can have learn a lot about those kind of situations. I think you can learn most of those bad experiences that you have learned from the good ones. So just try to communicate with the team, really, not just the manager of the team, but the people around you. Try to spread your opinion. I think that's pretty valuable.
And that's a message I think you'll hear in all of our episodes, is communicate, right? There's no substitute for that. So whatever you do, don't struggle in silence. Communicate to someone that these problems are happening, so you can work together to solve, the situation you're in. Communication and iced coffee pretty much solve every problem, or at least start getting you on that road.
Well, and honestly, if you're in a project and no one's listening to you and you're recognizing there are issues and you're sick of it, we're always hiring. So, just check out our website if you're interested.
Here.
Especially good communicators.
I mean, we've obviously talked about a lot today. Like, there's a lot to unpack from all of this. I guess, Kareem, how would you summarize, just overall, Cliff Notes version, how would you summarize the sunk cost fallacy in a few words?
So, one, do your homework. see what's available, see what you're using. Does it still match up against, what the recommendations are, what you're using, what the future version of the project holds. Be on the lookout early and often. Really, don't be afraid to take your head out from the sand every now and then, look around, see what's going on, make sure you're not stuck in a rabbit hole. And then, routinely consult others for opinions to help mitigate your biases and blind spots, and see if there's better ways for doing what you're doing. And then do keep in mind that, there is an emotional aspect in addition to the measurable aspects, like time and money and effort that goes into it. People are tied to their ideas and implementations, and however you handle the situation, you should be, cognizant of, managing that with the emotional aspects in mind. And then, we'll say it over and over again, but communication is key. You should communicate early and often throughout this, internally, and then, the managers and leadership will be also communicating with the clients to, see if there's any fallout or side effects from this approach. Ideally, all of you can work together to make sure you have a better product in the end that comes out of all of this. And then, since we talked about movies, it'd be a missed opportunity if I didn't stick a bad joke in here. So, how did Reese eat her ice cream?
I don't even know.
With her spoon.
Oh gosh.
Oh,
And with that, thank you for joining us. We look forward to Oh goodness, I butchered that. And with that, thank you for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you next time on Connecting the Dots.